test. Good morning, Pastor. Would you open us in prayer? This morning, my topic is going to be the presence of God. According to the Bible. I mean, you can take different, I guess different other sources of people's concept of God, but the biblical presence of God. Because I think it helps you to think through some of this, because it kind of puts things in perspective. And I think that the Old Testament view of God is a little different than the New Testament of God and the presence of God. And so I was going to take you through some kind of encounters with God and kind of talk about some of that. The first kind of mention, we know, with the Garden of Eden, God created them, and there's this this presence of God with them and that kind of thing. But we have to look even before that, because we know that God was outside of creation. In other words, God existed before creation. So God existed and then he created it. And so presence of God is kind of something that's kind of a reference. In other words, when I say it's a reference of presence of God with us, because otherwise it's out there and whatever. But I'm kind of getting more into the presence of God with us and those encounters. And so this is something that have taken us back, that one of the first kind of things that it talks about when it talks about, not just God creating man and woman in that process, but it says in Genesis 3:8, "Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden." And this is because they had already eaten of the fruit. But you kind of get this image that it was probably pretty common for God to walk in the cool of the evening and kind of just meet Adam and Eve and say, "How are things going?" It sounds like that was like a daily occurrence. It's just that God was very near to them, and it was not a problem. And it was just kind of like, some people, if you've ever lived close to a relative or something, live next to your grandmother, you might go see your grandmother every day and just say, "How's it going?" and whatever. And so I think that's something we kind of get an image of God, is that he's present with them, and it's an ongoing, just, how are things going? What's because he created for them this perfect place. I mean, it didn't even rain. Can you imagine not even getting cold? Or, it'd be kind of like Hawaii on steroids. The temperature's always good, and it's. So we've kind of got that image of that this is what daily life was like for God. But then they've already sinned and created a mess with that. So the next person that we kind of get an encounter with God is, we have Jacob. And in Genesis 28:11 through 22, it says, "Jacob, when he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep." In other words, he made a pillow out of a rock. "He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth and its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, 'I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you.'" So here we're getting an image of this kind of conversation with God with Jacob, but it was during a dream, so Jacob's not really awake with it, but he senses that it was real. And so when he woke up, he said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." He was afraid, and he said, "How awesome is this place? There's none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." And then he said that early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed on his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel. And you got to break that word, because it actually is two different Hebrew words. It's Beit El, is kind of the way you would kind of look at it, but when you put, and so a Beit is the house, and El is a word for God. And so it's basically, he called the place House of God. Although the place used to be called Luz, which I'm pretty sure probably means light, but I don't know. And then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I'm taking and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear so that I return safely to my father's house, and this stone I've set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. So there's also another interesting thing there. We see the first episode probably of tithing is that Jacob is basically saying, if you bless me, a tenth goes back to you. And so he's made a commitment. He's basically said, this is God's house. Now, that's kind of an interesting thing because we never really think about God's house being in the open. But, you know, there's not a building there, but that's what he's called it. And so we move forward in another encounter with God, and we have Moses. And so Moses is working for his father-in-law, Jethro. You've got to put some of this in context because Moses has already gotten in trouble. You remember Moses, there was this whole thing about he was in the basket. He was raised in the Pharaoh's family. He killed one of the taskmasters of the slaves. And when he did that, he ran away to escape punishment and everything else. And as that process, he's now hiding out. He's living with Jethro. And it says, now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, but the bush was not consumed. I've been burning some brush recently, and that's kind of one of those weird things that if it would keep burning and not burn, that would be a kind of an odd concept. You just kind of see it's burning and it's going to keep burning, and I'm sure it just kind of like, oh my gosh. And Moses said, which is kind of an interesting thing. I think this is, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in some different ways, but I will now turn aside and see this great sight, the bush is not burnt. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here am I. And he said, draw not closer. Put off the shoes from your feet, for the place whereon you stand is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I have seen the affliction, the people of Egypt, and I've heard their cry, and their taskmasters, I know their sorrows, I'm going to take care of them. Well, at one point, in that same process, moving forward in that same chapter 3, at one point, Moses is having this dialogue, and he says, and behold, when I come into the children of Israel, and I shall say unto them, the God of your fathers has sent me unto you, and they shall say unto me, what is his name? What shall I say unto them? And this is one of the verses this is profound in theology for us, because it says, God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am, has sent me unto you. Now the words in Hebrew for I am is Yahweh. But it's interesting because if you look at the word Yahweh, it's like it's like the to be word, and in the way that it's actually there, it's not even that I am presently, but it's a verb which kind of means I was, I am, and I will be. And so it's kind of like the name of God is not just a noun, but it's a verb. And so it's pretty profound that he tells Moses that you don't have to worry about any of this other stuff. I'm not like all those gods that you learned about in Egypt. I'm not the God of the river. I'm not the God of the flies. I'm not the God of the water. I'm not the gods of the crocodile. I'm not the God of whatever. He said, I am it, basically. I am. And so Moses took some heart in that and went forward. And, we know the rest of the part about he frees them and everything else. But at one point, he's having another dialogue with God in Exodus 33, 14, and 15. And so he's talking to God. And he says that my presence shall go with thee, and I will give you rest. And Moses said unto him, if your presence does not go with me, just don't take us. If you're not going, we're not going. And so I think that's an interesting thing. It basically says if your presence is not here, it's better that we don't do anything. But we also know that through this whole process that God was present with them on a daily basis, a constant reminder for everybody in the entire tribe. It was one of those things that they didn't have to look far to know that God was with them. And when I say that, there's the pillar of fire and the pillar and the cloud, and so they can just look at any point and see where that is. And can you imagine being even a little kid? A little kid could say, hey, there's the presence of God. And they knew that we follow that. I don't know what else we do, but we're going to follow that. And so even in the midst of that, he provided food for them. They grumbled. He provided quail. He provided manna. He did all these things. But they had a constant presence of God, and yet they still rebelled and did everything else. But at some point, they're out there, and this is where that they get to Sinai. I know I'm talking about Exodus 33. That's a little later, but I still think it's interesting. He's telling him, like, if you're not going, I don't want to go without it. But going back into Exodus 19, starting at verse 10, this is where that God is preparing to give them the law. And he said unto Moses, go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and be ready against the third day. For the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. And thou shalt set bounds into the people around about, saying, take heed yourselves that you go not up into the mountain or touch the border of it. Whosoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. So in other words, you better put borders around this mountain, because God's coming down, and if if anybody touches it, they're gone. And so it's to protect them. There shall not be a hand touch it, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through. Whether it be beast or man, it shall not live. And the trumpet sound long, they shall come to the mountain. And Moses went down from the mount unto the people and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. And so they basically did ceremonial purification and stuff. And he said to the people, be ready against the third day. And so it came to pass third day of the morning that there were thunders and lightning and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceedingly loud. And so here's an encounter that God has his presence with the people, but it's one of those encounters that's it's probably going to be really going to get your attention. I guess is the best way to say that. It's not going to be just a little bitty thing. It's not like you can be asleep and go, hey, wait a minute, what's happening? And so the presence of God there is quite impressive. Let's just put it that way, that those people, they knew they were in the presence of God. But like I said, they had a constant reminder daily that God was with them, because they had the pillar and the cloud. But still, this is one of those times that something big was happening. Now, there's also a discussion, and I don't have the reference down. It's not that big of a deal. You can find it, but because it's in the same story, but involves a couple of different points and a couple of different things. But at one point, now Moses has a relationship with God. Let's face it, he has seen God. He's spoken to God in the burning bush. He's never seen him physically, but he's spoken with him. He's gone through all this stuff with Egypt, the water, the separating the water from the rock, all these many things God has led him through. He has gone up on the mountain, and at some point he asks God, can I see you? And God basically says, no, you can't look at me, because if you look at me full front, you're dead. It's going, nobody sees God until the end of this. In other words, when your life is over, you can see God, but not before. And he says, but I'll let you see my backside. And what's funny is I guess for some reason, I've always had this really weird vision of that. I mean, what does that look like? Are you going to really see, skin? Are you seeing, a robe? Or, is it, because one of my funny images is it like somebody in a hospital gown? I'm like, oh my gosh, but surely it wasn't something like that. But either way, it was the backside of God. It wasn't his face. But what was fascinating about the point in that story is that because Moses saw the back of God, just the back, his face glowed. And it glowed so brightly People, oh man, Moses, we can't, it's too bright, Moses. And so they created a veil that Moses had to wear to cover his face because it was so bright. And so, in other words, his being in the presence of God, seeing the backside, he now was bright. And so they created this veil. But the other thing, the sad part of this, at one point in the story later, the brightness went away. Moses had kind of moved on a little bit away from God, separated with God, was not in that strong relationship that he had been before. Things had kind of changed. But he still wore the veil even though he didn't glow. And so he didn't want the people to know that I'm not glowing anymore. And that's kind of a sad statement. So, I kind of see Moses as a great person, but at the end of his life, it was kind of a sad deal. And I'm not saying he's not with God, but it's just that, you could tell he just probably, he's probably thinking, if I just done this better, if I just done this right, I could have stayed in the glow, But there's something that kind of just to want to talk about, because there's another verse that says something a little more here later that we kind of get to. 1 John 4:12. I should have marked these. In fact, I may have it over here. Let me see. I think I do. Yeah, here I do. 1 John 4:12, it says, "No one has seen God at any time. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfect in us." In other words, no one has seen God, but others can see God's reflection in us. That's the way I kind of take that verse. So like Moses saw the back of God, people aren't going to see the face of God, but God's love is perfect with us. God is love, and so we can kind of, people can get a glimpse of God if we are in love and they see us. And so that's kind of a powerful statement to think about, that's kind of what, but it's clear. They say no one has seen God. And like I said, God says, if you've seen me, you're dead. So anybody that I think that comes to us and says, well, I had this near-death experience and I saw God, I think at that point you can just say, no, you didn't. Moses didn't, so Moses didn't see him, you didn't see him. And then 1 Kings 8:27, "But will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain. You know how much less the house which I have built." So this is moving forward. They built they have a tabernacle for God. They have, later we get a temple from David. People are trying to build a house for God. And I think that we probably need to take a little caution from that, because you can see that Jacob basically said that this is God's house, and you're like, well, where's the roof? And so here they've tried that, and it says in this section that two things would happen at the different places, but and we talk about the Holy and Holies, but in the tabernacle, the priests were there, the priests were consecrated, they were supposed to be able to be there, but the thing filled up with cloud and they couldn't see, and it was so impressive that it's like, whoa. And the same thing happened in the temple. They had the inner sanctuary, and God's presence filled it. But at the same time, God is not contained in a building, and that's what they're kind of talking about here. It says, I think in Revelation, that the earth is his footstool. And so the presence of God is not something to talk about in terms of contained in a building, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Moving forward, David is chosen by God. There's the whole deal with Saul, and so Saul becomes king because the people chose him. Now that we're talking about an election, well, the people elected Saul. And God had chosen David, and Saul spent his entire life trying to fight against this, and found out basically, no, David still is the one that God has chosen. But when David first encounters, David is first encountered by Samuel. Samuel goes to the house and looks through everybody and says, no, 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 no. And then here comes the ruddy runt of the family, the little kid who's out watching the sheep, and he comes in, and Samuel's like, this is the one. God, wait a minute. This is the one? Not this tall guy, not this strong guy, not this smart guy, not this, he's got all these guys, and he's like, this is the one? And so the Lord said, yes, this is it. He said, take a heifer with you and say, I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I'll show you what you do. And they did all this, and he went to Bethlehem, and, basically when Samuel shows up, Samuel is such a powerful priest. They even say, do you come in peace? They're afraid of Samuel. When he shows up, they're thinking, are we about to get open? Is this about to be bad? Why are you here? I guess it would be kind of like if Fauci showed up at the hospital. We'd be going, what's he doing here? I don't care. He'd have to say, I'm just here for a visit, because is there something about this virus that we don't know? Why is Fauci here? It's the same thing. Samuel shows up and they're like, whoa, wait a minute. Why is Samuel here? And so Samuel says, no, it's okay. It's cool. And so it says that, God talks to Samuel about David, and he said, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected Saul. He said, the Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And so they passed all by him, and the sons passed by. And this is the youngest, Jesse entered. There is the youngest, he's still not here. And Samuel says, send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives. And I understand it's a cultural thing, but that's kind of a big deal if your guests are still standing. In their culture, we see some of these movies from the Far East, and they're like, they have the carpets out, and they offer their guests drinks. And there's something I even learned from one of my deals, that they would give you an oil, and you would rub your hands, and it's like rose oil, and it smelled very nice. And so everything is made to make you feel comfortable and welcome as a guest. And that Jesse wants that to happen with Samuel. But instead, Samuel's like, nope, we'll stand. We'll wait. Bring him on. And so they get him and brought him in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. And then the Lord said, rise and anoint him. This is the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. And then Samuel went to Ramah. So Samuel actually didn't go back to Saul's area. He went somewhere else. But the point here is being that up until that point, David's a little kid, a shepherd, whatever. And I don't think it has to do with the oil itself. I don't think the oil has any magic powers. But the point is that when Samuel anointed him because God said he's the one, it said the Spirit of God was over him. And so the reason I want to bring that out is that that's a pivotal moment for David's life, is the Spirit now dwells to protect him. He's there. All these things can happen around David, but they're not going to happen to David. And so we see the whole thing with Goliath and everything else, and we kind of move forward from that, but we kind of know what that is. So now we look at this, and I'm kind of looking at David, some of his stuff later, because the Psalms were not written when he's a kid, but he the Psalms are just full of some great verses that go through things like, for example, Psalm 16:11. You will make known to me the path of life. In your presence is the fullness of joy. Your right hand there's pleasures forever. And he said, God blesses me. God looks out for me. God does these things. He says, let's see, that's not that one. He's talking about, some of God's blessings. I believe this is Psalm 139:18. I should count them, my blessings. They would outnumber the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. In other words, he feels the presence of God constantly. He knows it's there when he's asleep, but when he wakes up, he feels God's presence with him. Habakkuk 2:20. This is Old Testament stuff because I'm still kind of talking about some of this, but we've kind of talked about the house of God and this sort of stuff, but in Habakkuk 2:20, but the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. That's a reverential thing that's saying that God has a holy place. But where is his temple? And so Habakkuk at that point, they have no temple. There's nothing there. Nothing exists. And so at that point, there is no temple, but Habakkuk is saying, yes, God's in his temple. So like, oh, wait. Tabernacle, no temple, but God's in it. So there's Jeremiah 29:1. Carl, you find that one, and I'm going to find Isaiah 57:6. If you don't mind. Okay, Isaiah 57:6. Nope. I've got the wrong verse down. Oh, 51. It's 57:16. Okay, you've got Jeremiah 29:1. What you got?
These are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem
These are the words of Jeremiah the prophet.
the prophet sent from Jerusalem unto the residue of the elders which were carried away captives, to the priests and to the prophets and to all the people whom
Habakkuk or whatever.
Nebuchadnezzar had carried away captive from Jerusalem to Babylon. After that, Jeconiah, the king of the queen of the eunuchs, and the princes of Judah and Jerusalem, and the carpenters and the smiths were departed from Jerusalem by the hand of Elisha, the son of Shaphan, and Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah, whom Zedekiah, the king of Judah, sent from Babylon to Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, unto all that carried away captives, whom I caused to be carried away from Jerusalem into Babylon. Build ye houses and dwell in them, and plant gardens and eat the fruit of them. Take ye wives and beget sons and daughters, and take wives from your sons, and give your daughters to the husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters, that ye may be increased there and not diminished.
Okay, good. So this is a time for the people of Israel that's incredibly low point. I mean, they've been taken away in captives, and they're in a new place. But what God is telling them is to do these things because he's saying, even though you're there, I still am in your presence. I'm still with you. It's horrible. We know that. I got it. But I'm still with you. And so it's one of those times that's kind of like, we have times in our lives. Have you ever had times that you don't feel like they're going right, and so you got sour grapes, you're like, but it was so much better. It can be so much, but I'm here. And so they're in the midst of this, and they're saying, but we're here. This is not what we want to be. We had your presence. We had this stuff. Isn't there something better? And he said, just keep doing what you're doing. Do your thing. It's okay. So we move forward in time, and we get Israel through all of this sort of stuff. Now they're under Roman occupation, and a baby is born, and his name is Emmanuel, which means God is with us. And still at that point, the presence of God is around them, and kind of that sort of thing. And so that's how we see the presence of God, is He is there around them, but He's not in them. And so we move forward, and Jesus lives His life. They walk with Him, Emmanuel, God with us. The disciples daily see this guy, but even then they don't get it. It's kind of funny, they don't really, all these people ask Him, who are you? And He says, who do you say I am? They don't get it. But He's there with them, which is, even His name says God is with you. And so we move forward, and then with all the many things that happen with Jesus' life, all the stories, all the miracles he does, you think they'd kind of get it. And I think a lot of them do. I think most of them do. But at the same time, they're human. And so it's kind of like at some point when he dies, for us, what is death? Death is the end. And so Jesus has died. And they've kind of said, it's over. It was a good gig. We really enjoyed it. We liked being with him. It was amazing the stuff we got to see. And he's an awesome guy. This is just wonderful. But he's dead. And it said that were these disciples going out and being disciples and doing what they were supposed to do? No, they went back to fishing and all their kind of stuff they're doing, and they basically went back to what they knew. And they just kind of said, well, he's dead, it's over. So he comes back to them. And he comes back to them in multiple times, multiple ways. Thomas gets to touch and say, yeah, he's really real. And that looks like kind of like a lethal injury you got there, but we saw you die. And so the presence of God is still with them, but it's still more of something that is considered outside of them. And so Jesus is kind of saying, no, I basically have power over death. He had to come back because it would be hard for them to believe it anyway. They even had one of the, I thought it was kind of interesting, one of my seminary profs, they talk about, when Jesus leaves the second time, after the cross, but when he ascends up into heaven, that it was probably a good thing he did that so that they weren't doing this. They weren't running around. Has anybody seen Jesus? He was here the other day. Hey, we saw him on the beach. Let's go back to the beach. And so for them, it was probably a good thing that he went up into heaven. They got to see that because then they could say, okay, he went up. But like I said, I don't think that his presence really left him. And this is what's amazing because he talks about in John 14, this is probably, if you get nothing out of this today, John 14:16, and let me make sure I've got the right verse. Because this is where all the money is. This one verse. And I'll give you some background even. If you'll ask anything in my name, I will do it. If you love me, keep my commandments. Here it is. And I pray the Father, and he shall give you another comforter, that he may abide with you forever. And we don't really realize how strong that statement is because it totally takes the Old Testament concept of presence of God and totally revolutionizes it. Because up until Jesus does this process, when these people speak in tongues and everything else, when Jesus does what he says at that point, it's a radical change. Because up in that point, you could be anointed, you could be, but the Holy Spirit lived outside of you. When he's talking about this comfort, he said the Holy Spirit is going to live in you. And so the presence of God now is not just in our world, what we see, but it's here. It's part of us. That's in us. Where is it? I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. But it's in us. It's medically I can say that people have had all kinds of things cut off, shot off, ruined, gone, whatever. But I feel they've still got the Spirit in them. I don't think you can take that away. I think that Spirit's there until they die, and I think that it's somewhere, but I don't know where it is and what it is, but it's there. And so that's where the presence of God has totally changed over all this time. Old Testament outside, New Testament inside, and so there's a difference in the way that we as human beings can interact with God. But it sounds like that it's not that everybody's born with this thing inside of us. We got to let it in. And we can sit there our whole lives and say, nope, don't want it. Don't want it. Don't want to have it. Don't want it. And so that's the whole thing of salvation. If we just basically ask, it's gone. It's in. It's there. But so we ask God into us, the Spirit comes. And I don't think it ever leaves. I think once it's there, it's there. And so that's a powerful thing. But I kind of get into some of this because I think that we need to realize that the Spirit of God presence of God is not just around us, but it's in us. But there's another concept that I've seen people say that I don't see it this way. And this, I kind of understand what they're really kind of asking, but have you ever seen anybody invite God into our presence? God, please come with us. It's kind of like, when I walk in this building, He was here before I got here. He's here now. He's in Carl, He's in you, He's in me, He's here. And when I leave, He's still here. And this building doesn't contain Him, nor does any other building, nor does anything else. So let's even go back to where I started this story with creation. For us, life is linear. For us, there's today and tomorrow and the next day and so forth and so on until we die. It's a line. God is outside of that. God created that. So for the presence of God, it's here, it's there, it's all over the place. It's no big deal for Him. He owns it. He controls it. He created it. It's Him. He created time. And so, anytime that we're starting to saying, God, please come into our presence, we're kind of like, you missed the point. He's already here. And we don't have to do that. And we don't, you can ask for, I want more. I mean, I think that's certainly reasonable. Fill us with your Spirit even more. No problem. But I wouldn't invite Him in because He's already there and He's not going to leave. Now, which goes back to another thing that I want to get into about presence of God, because I think there's one key passage that we get misconceived, and it happens when Jesus is on the cross. And the way that I think that we misconceive this is because we're not in the mindset of Jesus Christ, who was born as a Jewish boy, who learned his Psalms, who lived a life as that, learning everything that anybody else did. And so when we get this, Him on the cross, it's a pivotal moment for Jesus. It's a pivotal moment for mankind. It's a pivotal moment in which He dies, but He has power over death, but we don't know that at the time. And so for us, and in the movies, and everything else, Jesus I believe Aramaic would say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And so we see that and we think, oh, that is when God left Him, because, Jesus has all these sins on Him. And God can't exist there because, that's not holy. That's sinful. And so we got a problem with that. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? And so we say, well, okay, there's a time that God was not present. I argue with that, and the reason I do is I use Psalm 22. Because Psalm 22 starts with, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me, and from the words of my roaring? It's not my speech, but my hollering, my noise. Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but you don't hear, and in the night season, and am not silent. But you are holy, O you that inhabit the praises of Israel. So he's saying, where does God live? He lives in the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in you, they trusted, and you did deliver them. They cried unto you and were delivered. They trusted in you and were not confounded. So at the point that Jesus is on the cross and saying, why have you forsaken me? I would highly argue that this is what He's telling those people around Him. If you knew this, it would be the same as, let's go to the next, the 23rd Psalm. If I was sitting up here and I said to you, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And then I died, what are y'all going to think I was saying? You're going to say, He maketh me to lie down in green pastures, He leadeth me beside the still waters, He restoreth my soul. We'd go through that, because we got that one memorized. For a Hebrew boy, he would have had 22 memorized as well. Why wouldn't he have 22 if he had 23? And so with 22, I'm not going to do the whole thing for you right now, but there's all of this stuff that it talks about. It's like that I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted in the midst of my guts, my bowels, whatever, it's gone. My strength is dried up like a piece of pottery. My tongue sticks to my jaws. Now, when Jesus is on that cross, and all this stuff has happened to him, he's been beaten, he's been bled, he's walked, he's carried, he's whatever. The only thing he got to drink was somebody gave him a little vinegar on a stick, right? I've seen people in the hospital sick. I've seen people with diarrhea and bleeding and everything else. They're thirsty. He's thirsty. My tongue sticks to my mouth. Even him saying, my God, why hast thou forsaken me, was probably pretty difficult speech to even say. So he's there and he says that. And so I would say that if you are Hebrew, you start going through that verse and you contemplate and you think about it. And the 22nd Psalm, not the 23rd, but the 22nd Psalm, basically my paraphrase is, if you will allow me, is God is in charge, God's taking names, and he's going to kick butt. By the time this is all over, God is still going to get his, Don't you dare think that for any minute, the fact that Jesus is on this cross, God's turned from him and it's gone. Oh no, that's not what he's saying. He said, God is here with me. I'm going to die. I got power over this. This is nothing. You guys don't see it, but that's okay because I'm coming back. I'm coming back because God's still in charge. I'm coming back to see you. I'm going to let you see me. I'm coming back to bring you the Comforter. I'm coming back. And so I think that would have been an incredibly powerful thing, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And not oh my gosh. Because I think in these movies, I remember as a kid watching, this, and the centurion says, truly this is the Son of God, and the cloud gets dark, and, the sky gets dark, and there's all this stuff. We get this feeling that somehow, now this is where our theology has to not allow this, somehow it's like God separates from Jesus, the Holy Spirit's not there on the cross. No. It's all there, and it never leaves. He's telling you that. God dies. But remember, God is outside of death. God created life. God is in charge of all this. It's no big deal to him. But he has to die to pay for our sins. So he had power over death. And that's one way of saying it, is that God is still present. And that God did not leave him at that moment. And so I think that's important for us to kind of realize, because I think that at times, if we feel that we do not have the presence of God, if we feel that God is distant, then the problem, I think, is not with God. The problem is with us. Because if God seems distant, it's because of what we have done to erect these barriers with God. Like Adam and Eve, starting this story in the Garden of Eden, until they sinned, they could walk and talk with him every day. But they screwed it up and something changed. We have the same thing, because when we're living in sin, I don't feel, and this is a concept I've had to struggle with too, I don't feel that God leaves us. I think God is, still there watching, in control, seeing you. But we're like little kids. We got something we're not supposed to have. We're going to go in the corner. And we're going to create this sin, and we're going to live like this and hope that nobody sees us. God still sees us. God still knows what we're doing. God did not leave us. We leave God. We turn our backs to God. God does not turn his back to us. So I hope you keep that in mind this week, and I hope it gives you a chance to think about where's the presence of God. Call to me and I will answer you and show you great and unsearchable things that you do not know. Jeremiah 33 something, 30, whatever. I'm blanking on it right now. I should know it. At the moment, my mind is a blank, but Jeremiah 33, call to me. I'll answer you and show you great and unsearchable things you do not know. Y'all have a blessed week.